China issues ultimatum as Venezuela crisis becomes global power struggle. What if I told you that a single arrest could trigger World War III? That's exactly what happened last Tuesday when Venezuelan security forces detained a Chinese energy executive in Caracas. Within hours, Beijing issued an ultimatum that sent shockwaves through Washington, Moscow, and every major capital on Earth. But here's what the mainstream media won't tell you. This isn't just about one person. It's about the largest geopolitical chess game in modern history, where the stakes are measured in trillions of dollars, and the survival of entire economic systems. And right now, we're watching the opening moves of what could become the defining conflict of our generation. You think you understand the Venezuela crisis? Think again. Because what's happening in Caracas right now isn't a regional dispute. It's the moment when three superpowers finally drew their lines in the sand, and the consequences will reshape everything you thought you knew about global power. Let me take you behind the headlines where the real story begins. The arrest that changed everything. On January 2, 2026, Dr. Li Wei, a senior executive from China National Petroleum Corporation, was forcibly removed from his hotel in downtown Caracas. The Venezuelan government claimed he was involved in illegal financial activities. The Chinese government called it kidnapping. The arrest wasn't clean. It wasn't diplomatic. According to eyewitness accounts, Venezuelan intelligence agents stormed the Marriott Hotel at 3:47 a.m., using electronic jammers to cut off all communications in a 6-block radius. Li Wei's security detail, 3 former Chinese military officers, were tasered and detained. His encrypted laptop was seized along with documents that reportedly contained financial codes for accessing $15 billion in emergency Chinese credit lines. The operation had all the hallmarks of American intelligence planning. Venezuelan forces used equipment that hadn't been seen in South America before: Israeli-made cell phone jammers, German-manufactured restraint systems, and most tellingly, tactical communication devices that operated on NATO frequencies. Someone had provided Venezuela with technology and coordination that their own intelligence services couldn't access independently. Within 6 hours, Beijing's response was unprecedented. Foreign Minister Wang Yi didn't issue a diplomatic protest. He didn't call for dialogue. Instead, he delivered what can only be described as an ultimatum: the immediate and unconditional release of Chinese personnel, or China will consider all options to protect its citizens and interests. All options. Those 2 words sent financial markets into freefall across 3 continents. Because when China says all options, they don't mean strongly worded letters. They mean naval deployments, economic warfare, and the kind of pressure that can collapse governments overnight. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. The man who wasn't supposed to exist. Dr. Li Wei's official job was overseeing oil exploration contracts. His real job, managing China's secret financial lifeline to the Maduro regime, a $60 billion credit arrangement that's kept Venezuela's government alive for the past 2 years. This wasn't public knowledge until last week. Li Wei operated from what intelligence sources call the Shadow Embassy, a 40-story office building in Caracas that officially housed Chinese commercial attachés, but actually served as the nerve center for China's entire Latin American financial operation. The building contained servers processing 2 billion in daily transactions, quantum encrypted communication systems linking directly to Beijing's central bank, and most significantly, a gold vault containing 200 tons of Venezuelan bullion held as collateral for Chinese loans. The sophistication was breathtaking. According to leaked documents obtained by EA Worldview, Li Wei controlled a shadow banking network that processed payments for Venezuelan oil sales, bypassing U.S. sanctions through a maze of shell companies across 12 countries. Every barrel of oil sold to China, India, and Malaysia went through his system. But the network wasn't limited to oil. Intelligence reports reveal that Li Wei's system also processed payments for Cuban medical services, Nicaraguan agricultural exports, and most controversially, arms sales from North Korea to various South American militant groups. The financial infrastructure had become a complete alternative to the Western banking system, handling over $200 billion in annual transactions that never touched a single American or European bank. He wasn't just an executive. He was the financial architect keeping Maduro in power, and that's when everything clicked into place. The arrest wasn't random. It wasn't about corruption charges. It was about one thing: gaining control over China's financial pipeline to Venezuela. Someone wanted to cut off that $60 billion lifeline, and they were willing to risk a global confrontation to do it. But who? And why now? Washington's secret gambit. Here's where the story gets dangerous. 3 weeks before Li Wei's arrest, the CIA briefed President Biden on what they called Operation Financial Pressure, a classified plan to disrupt Chinese financing of the Maduro government. The goal wasn't regime change through military force. It was economic strangulation through financial warfare. The briefing documents, leaked to WikiLeaks just 48 hours ago, reveal the stunning scope of American intelligence gathering on Chinese financial operations. The CIA had been monitoring Li Wei's activities for 18 months, using NSA satellite intercepts to track his movements, financial transaction analysis to map his network, and human intelligence assets within the Venezuelan government to understand his daily operations. They knew everything. They knew Li Wei met every Tuesday with Maduro's finance minister at a private residence in the hills above Caracas. They knew he personally authorized emergency cash transfers to keep Venezuelan military units loyal during the food riots of December 2025. Most importantly, they knew he was preparing to expand the Chinese financial network to include Brazil, Colombia, and potentially Mexico, creating a South American economic bloc completely independent of U.S. influence. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. If you can't overthrow Maduro directly, cut off his money supply. But there was a problem. Li Wei's network was technically legal under international law. China hadn't violated any UN sanctions. They'd simply created an alternative financial system that operated outside Western control. So Washington needed a different approach. According to sources familiar with the operation, U.S. intelligence agencies began feeding information to Venezuelan opposition groups about Li Wei's activities. Not false information, real intelligence about his financial operations. The goal was to create enough political pressure within Venezuela to force Maduro to act against his own Chinese benefactors. The psychological warfare was sophisticated. American operatives spread rumors through Venezuelan social media that Li Wei was secretly recording conversations with government officials for Beijing's intelligence services. They leaked photos of his luxury lifestyle, $50,000 dinners, private jets, a collection of vintage cars, to Venezuelan newspapers struggling with food shortages and economic collapse. Most effectively, they convinced key Venezuelan military commanders that Li Wei's financial controls represented a threat to their own corrupt revenue streams. It worked. Facing mounting pressure from his own military commanders who saw Chinese influence as a threat to their power, Maduro authorized Li Wei's detention. He thought he was protecting his government from criticism. Instead, he just triggered the largest East-West confrontation since the Cold War. China's nuclear option, Beijing's response, revealed something that should terrify anyone who understands global economics. Within 24 hours of Li Wei's arrest, China quietly began what financial analysts are calling the Great Withdrawal. Chinese banks started pulling credit lines from over 40 countries that maintained diplomatic relations with Venezuela. Trade agreements worth $200 billion were suspended. Most significantly, China began converting its U.S. Treasury holdings to gold at an unprecedented rate. This wasn't diplomatic pressure. This was economic warfare. The numbers are staggering. China dumped $400 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds in a single 48-hour period, causing the largest bond market disruption since 2008. Chinese state companies canceled $60 billion in contracts with European firms. Most devastatingly, China suspended rare earth mineral exports to all NATO countries, threatening to shut down production of smartphones, electric cars, and military equipment across the Western world. The message was clear. If you want to play games with Chinese citizens, China will show you what real economic power looks like, and the collateral damage won't be limited to Venezuela. European markets opened down 8% on Wednesday morning. Oil prices spiked 15% in a single day. The dollar began its steepest decline against major currencies since 2008. But that was just the beginning. China's economic retaliation included weapons that most analysts didn't know existed. Chinese cyber teams launched what intelligence sources describe as the most sophisticated financial warfare attack in history, targeting the SWIFT banking system that processes international transactions. The attacks weren't designed to steal money. They were designed to create delays, confusion, and fear. For 6 hours on Wednesday, banks across Europe and North America couldn't process international payments, creating panic in markets already destabilized by China's bond sales. The cyber attacks carried a simple message: China could shut down Western financial systems whenever it chose. Russia enters the game. On Thursday, Moscow made its move. President Putin announced that Russian naval forces would begin routine exercises in the Caribbean, just 500 miles from Venezuela's coast. The timing wasn't coincidental. Russia was sending an unmistakable message. Any attempt to pressure Venezuela would be met with direct Russian military response. But Putin's calculations went deeper than military posturing. The Russian naval deployment included elements that hadn't been seen in the Western Hemisphere since the Cuban Missile Crisis: nuclear-powered submarines armed with hypersonic missiles, electronic warfare ships capable of disrupting satellite communications across the entire Caribbean basin. Most significantly, the Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier, Russia's flagship, accompanied by 4 destroyers and 2 nuclear submarines. This wasn't an exercise, this was an occupation force. Russia and China had been planning this moment for months. According to intelligence reports, the two countries signed a secret cooperation agreement in December that committed both nations to defending their respective spheres of influence against Western interference. Venezuela was explicitly mentioned as a shared strategic interest. Li Wei's arrest had triggered what defense analysts are calling the Moscow-Beijing Mutual Defense Protocol. The protocol, details of which were leaked by a former Russian intelligence officer now living in Estonia, committed both countries to coordinated economic and military responses to Western pressure on their strategic partners. The agreement included provisions for sharing intelligence, coordinating military deployments, and most ominously, joint retaliation against any country that threatened Chinese or Russian interests. For the first time since World War II, Russia and China were coordinating military and economic responses to Western pressure. The Cold War had officially become a 3-way conflict, and Venezuela was ground zero. Russian military advisors began arriving in Caracas on Friday morning, just 3 days after Li Wei's arrest. Their mission, according to intercepted communications, was to ensure the stability of Russian strategic interests in Venezuela. Translation: prevent any Western military intervention by making it clear that attacking Venezuela meant attacking Russian forces. The energy war begins. Here's what makes this crisis truly global: energy. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, 297 billion barrels. That's more than Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Iran combined. For the past 5 years, China has secured exclusive access to roughly 60% of that oil through its financial arrangements with Maduro. But the energy equation goes far beyond crude oil. Venezuela also controls the second largest natural gas reserves in South America and possesses the world's 4th largest deposits of rare earth minerals, the materials essential for manufacturing everything from wind turbines to electric car batteries. China's deals with Venezuela weren't just about current energy needs, they were about controlling the resources that would power the global transition to renewable energy. If Li Wei's arrest disrupts that arrangement, China loses its primary energy security buffer. Without Venezuelan oil, China's economy faces the same vulnerability that destroyed Japan in World War II: complete dependence on hostile powers for energy supplies. China won't accept that vulnerability. Intelligence sources report that Chinese military planners have been studying 2 scenarios: economic retaliation and direct intervention. Economic retaliation means weaponizing China's control over global supply chains, the rare earth minerals that power every smartphone, the semiconductor components that run every computer, the pharmaceutical ingredients that stock every hospital. Direct intervention means Chinese naval forces in the Caribbean. The Chinese military has been preparing for this possibility since 2024. Satellite imagery reveals that China has been constructing what appears to be a naval base on the Venezuelan coast near La Guaira, disguised as a commercial shipping facility. The facility includes deep water ports capable of accommodating Chinese destroyers, fuel storage tanks sufficient to support extended naval operations, and most tellingly, radar installations with tracking capabilities that could monitor U.S. naval movements throughout the Caribbean. Both options lead to the same place, a confrontation between nuclear powers over energy resources, and unlike previous proxy conflicts, this one can't be contained to a single region, the hidden stakes. But oil is only part of the equation. What most analysts are missing is the financial revolution happening beneath the surface of this crisis. China's shadow banking network in Venezuela wasn't just about bypassing U.S. sanctions. It was a prototype for something much larger, an alternative global financial system that operates completely outside Western control. Li Wei wasn't just managing $60 billion in Venezuelan credits. He was testing the infrastructure for a new international monetary system based on digital currencies, commodity-backed transactions, and direct bilateral trade agreements that completely bypass the US dollar. The technology behind this system represents a quantum leap in financial independence. According to technical specifications leaked by a former Chinese banking official, Li Wei's network operated on blockchain technology that was 10 times faster than existing Western systems. Transactions that took 3 days through traditional banks could be completed in minutes. Most importantly, the system used artificial intelligence to automatically convert between different currencies, calculate commodity values in real time, and adjust exchange rates based on supply and demand without any human intervention. Think about that for a moment. For 80 years, the US dollar has been the foundation of global trade. Every major transaction, from oil sales to grain purchases, ultimately flows through American banks and American oversight. That's how the US maintains global influence, not through military force alone, but through financial control. China's Venezuela network proved that system could be replaced. The network had already processed $500 billion in transactions over 2 years, involving 23 countries and over 200 major corporations. Chinese companies were buying Brazilian soybeans, Russian wheat, and Iranian oil using the system. More threateningly for Western financial institutions, major European and Asian companies were beginning to request access to the network to avoid the delays and fees associated with traditional banking. If Li Wei's financial infrastructure succeeds, it doesn't just change Venezuela's relationship with China, it changes the entire global economy. Countries could trade directly with each other using Chinese digital currency systems without any involvement from Western financial institutions. The implications are staggering. Washington's desperate response, which explains why Washington was willing to risk so much to shut it down. According to leaked State Department communications, senior officials described Li Wei's network as an existential threat to dollar supremacy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen reportedly told President Biden that allowing China's Venezuelan system to succeed would be equivalent to financial surrender. The leaked documents reveal the extent of American panic about losing financial control. Internal Federal Reserve analyses projected that widespread adoption of China's alternative financial system could reduce demand for US dollars by 40% within 5 years. That would trigger inflation rates not seen since the 1970s, collapse the value of US government debt, and potentially force the United States to default on its financial obligations for the first time in history. The plan to pressure Maduro into arresting Li Wei wasn't just about Venezuela. It was about preventing the collapse of American financial hegemony. But they miscalculated China's response. Beijing didn't see Li Wei's arrest as an attack on one person or even one project. They saw it as a declaration of financial war against China's future economic independence, and they responded accordingly. The great irony is that by trying to prevent China's alternative financial system, Washington may have accelerated its creation. China is now rushing to implement similar networks in over 30 countries, using the Venezuelan crisis as justification for urgent action. Chinese financial teams are reportedly working 24-hour shifts to establish alternative banking networks in Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, and most significantly, Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia joins China's financial system, it would represent the final blow to dollar supremacy, as oil, the foundation of dollar demand, would be traded in Chinese digital currency instead of US dollars. The military equation. Meanwhile, the military implications continue to escalate. Russian naval exercises in the Caribbean aren't just symbolic. Moscow has been quietly establishing what defense analysts call strategic partnerships with several South American countries, including Cuba, Nicaragua, and now potentially Venezuela. These partnerships include provisions for Russian military bases, joint training exercises, and technology transfers. The scale of Russian military involvement became clear when satellite imagery revealed the true size of the deployment. 18 Russian ships are currently operating in Caribbean waters, the largest Russian naval presence in the Western Hemisphere since 1962. The deployment includes not just combat vessels, but support ships, intelligence-gathering platforms, and most concerning to Pentagon analysts, missile defense systems capable of shooting down American aircraft operating from bases in Florida and Puerto Rico. China has been equally active. Chinese military advisors have been present in Venezuela since 2019, officially focused on cybersecurity cooperation. In reality, they've been building an integrated air defense system that covers most of Venezuela's oil infrastructure. Any military intervention would face not just Venezuelan forces, but advanced Chinese anti-aircraft systems operated by Chinese personnel. The Chinese military presence includes 2,000 technical advisors, who are actually active-duty People's Liberation Army officers, S-400 surface-to-air missile systems that can shoot down aircraft 200 miles away, and electronic warfare equipment capable of jamming GPS signals and disrupting communications across northern South America. The message is clear. Venezuela is now under joint Chinese-Russian protection. But here's the truly dangerous part. The point of no return. We've reached what military strategists call the point of cascade failure. Every action now triggers multiple reactions across multiple theaters. If the U.S. increases pressure on Venezuela, China retaliates economically against U.S. allies. If China escalates economically, Russia responds militarily. If Russia moves militarily, NATO feels compelled to respond. The Venezuela crisis has become a global feedback loop where each escalation makes the next escalation more likely and more severe. Intelligence agencies across 3 continents are reporting the same assessment. We're approximately 72 hours away from actions that cannot be reversed. The specific triggers are now clear. If Venezuela doesn't release Li Wei by Sunday, China has committed to implementing Phase 2 of its economic retaliation, targeting American companies directly. This would include freezing assets of major U.S. corporations operating in China, suspending rare earth exports indefinitely, and most devastatingly, dumping the remaining $3 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds that China holds. If China implements Phase 2, the United States has indicated it will activate emergency authorities under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, potentially freezing $2 trillion in Chinese assets held in American banks and blocking all Chinese access to the SWIFT banking system. If the U.S. freezes Chinese assets, Russia has committed to military action to protect Chinese interests, meaning direct confrontation between Russian and American forces. For the first time since World War II, China has given Venezuela until Sunday to release Li Wei unconditionally. Russia has committed to defending Venezuelan sovereignty by any means necessary. The U.S. has activated emergency economic protocols that could freeze Chinese assets worth $2 trillion. Sunday is January 7th, 2026. That's in 3 days. What happens next? Here's what the experts won't tell you. Nobody knows how this ends without a major war. The financial stakes are too high for compromise. China cannot allow its alternative financial system to be destroyed. The U.S. cannot allow dollar supremacy to collapse. Russia cannot allow its strategic partnerships to be dismantled. War game simulations conducted by the RAND Corporation, leaked last month, show that every realistic scenario leads to direct military confrontation within 6 months of Li Wei's arrest. The most optimistic scenarios involve limited conflicts, cyber warfare that cripples financial systems for weeks, naval confrontations in the South China Sea that stop short of nuclear exchange, economic warfare that triggers global recession but avoids military action. The pessimistic scenarios are too horrifying to describe in detail. And Venezuela? Venezuela has become the cork in a bottle that's building pressure toward explosion. The most likely scenarios all lead to the same place: direct confrontation between nuclear powers over economic survival. We're not talking about proxy conflicts anymore. We're talking about China, Russia, and the United States drawing lines they cannot cross without losing everything they've built over the past 80 years. Li Wei's arrest may have triggered the final phase of the Cold War that never really ended. It just went underground, into financial systems and economic warfare, until this moment when all the hidden conflicts finally surfaced simultaneously. The next 72 hours will determine whether we slide into global conflict or find some way to step back from the brink. But stepping back would require compromises that none of these powers can politically afford to make. The real question. So here's what you need to understand. This isn't really about Venezuela anymore. This is about whether the global system that's governed international relations since 1945 can survive the rise of alternative power centers, whether the U.S. can maintain its position as the world's economic hegemon, whether China can secure its economic independence without triggering military conflict, whether Russia can rebuild its sphere of influence without provoking Western retaliation. Li Wei's arrest was just the match that lit a fuse that's been burning for decades. The explosion is coming. The only question is whether anyone can cut the fuse before it reaches the dynamite, and right now nobody seems willing to try.